Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
And Kate and I are storytellers, right? And we're going to spend a bit of time with you telling stories. We have a guest storyteller. And we're going to talk a little bit about the art and method and kind of what's going on in those things in the Capital District with storytelling.
That's right. That's what we do every month.
And this is we're kind of in the beginning of fall, and I was driving across central New York and I saw several of those huge maple trees that are in the farmyards, you know, and they were blazed with one little flash of red and the rest was kind of wrapped around still in green. But fall's coming for sure.
Well, I've had enough summer.
Enough summer. Boy, I don't know you ever could have enough summer. I don't know.
Hot summer.
Enough hot summer, okay. Enough. And we had some good things happen in storytelling over the summer too. For those of you who made it out to the Schoharie Crossing series, that was wonderful. And I got to a couple of those, and I saw Motico, and that was just really great. And I hope people got out to some storytelling around during the summer.
Of course, there's more in the fall.
There's more in the fall, and we'll probably come to a whole issue, but we're starting our
14th season.
14th season at Story Sundays at the Glenn Sanders Mansion.
And our 6th season at Proctor's.
At Proctor's. So there's a lot on those cards that we like to, and we have a big fandango coming up in November, don't we?
A big fandango.
Whatever that fandango is. That's a cowboy term. It's a cowboy term.
Celebration, yes.
Celebration.
Our 17th celebration.
And that's a kind of a mini festival with 7 or 8 storytellers in the GE Theater, and we have a wonderful time. We really do.
And the money we raise underwrites storytelling events throughout the subsequent year in area libraries, community centers, etc. And from the past 16 celebrations, we have underwritten over 80 storytelling events in such facilities.
Yep. And so we're excited about today and certainly the coming season, and we hope you are too. Storytelling is probably the oldest real art form. I like to think that the fellows that sketched that stuff on the cave walls had to talk about it before they did it.
I mean, right after they came back, I had my little spear, but not, and this big, mastodon was coming at me, but I stood my ground. I mean,
so we know that we have a place in the history of the world as storytellers because the storytelling goes on, and there are 2 reasons that you tell stories. You tell it to entertain or to teach. And both of those things kind of come together.
Well, I think there's a third reason.
Oh, is there a third reason?
Share experiences, community.
Community building.
I mean.
Yeah, you learn something new every day about storytelling. I often like to think that sometimes when I'm telling stories, I see people kind of just go someplace else. Now, sometimes I think they're asleep, but often they'll speak to me and they say that the story that I was telling reminded them of something, and they kind of half listen and they go there, and then they come back, and that kind of generative emotional memory, I think is at the heart of maybe what storytelling might be about, because it is a generative experience, and it's both for the teller and we hope for the listener. We're going to do an update in the middle of the show, but we have with us one of the most talented and charming storytellers that we know.
And an extraordinary storytelling teacher who helps each of her students find their own voice.
And she's brave, too, because 14 years ago, when we were thinking about starting Story Sundays at the Glenn Sanders Mansion, we spoke with Jeannine Laverty about how she and her friend, Becky Holder, another storyteller, would be great if they would open this new adventure of ours as performing. And they did. And they were wonderful. And in October, on the 21st of October, we are celebrating our 100th storytelling.
Yes, at the Glenn Sanders Mansion.
And guess who the performer storytellers are going to be?
Jeannine and Becky.
And
they've been back in the intervening time,
but they haven't. But we're bringing them back together. Becky has relocated out to Penyan on Kiku Lake, so she's coming home to join Jeannine at Story Sundays on the 21st of October, and you'll want to be there because it's going to be a high old town. And what's almost as good as that is we have Jeannine Laverty with us here in the studio right now today. Welcome, Jeannine.
Thank you, Joe.
It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
And you know, you do all these exciting things, and we just kind of like to have you around to kind of check in and see what you've been doing lately. But I'm worried that maybe it's not all storytelling. Have you broadened and diversified your?
I've been canning, Joe.
You've been canning?
I did my first canning since I was at my mother's elbow. I canned peaches.
You canned peaches.
One of the young men that I work with on the farm is a real folk singer person, and he said, Jeannine, you grew up in Iowa. Do you know Greg Brown? And of course, I know the music of Greg Brown. And immediately I remembered his song about Grandma put it all in a jar, the taste of the summer. And I knew that I was going to can my peaches this year.
Now, you have to give us a little bit of background. The farm is more than a place in a way. It's kind of a community. Can you give us just a snippet about the farm?
About the farm? Well, this is the Denison Farm, and the farm itself is just short of 200 acres. But some of that is wetland, and some of it is perennial border, that is trees and hills. The area under cultivation is about 20 acres, and there are about 12 of us who labor there with great love and sweat from the early spring until almost Thanksgiving.
Almost there. And this is a CSA. This is a community supported agriculture?
It is.
So
the Denisons feed about 500 families with their CSA and have markets in Troy and Saratoga.
Wow.
And sell other places as well.
And now, you were raised on a farm in the Midwest.
In Iowa.
In Iowa. And so if you'll excuse me, you've kind of returned to your roots with this adventure, or?
Well, my father he had a garden, but he would not have expected me to grow vegetables on such a huge scale. That's not what anybody did in Iowa at that time. But my dad did grow, it was a very diversified farm. Brian, my farmer, says that it was a homestead we had, because we had an orchard with all kinds of fruits, we had the family garden, and then we had Angus cattle, hogs, chickens, sold the eggs, ate the chickens, ate the cattle, grew corn, hay, oats. Hay was clover and alfalfa.
Right.
So it wasn't the kind of place that you see in Iowa now where it's only corn and there are no fences because there are no cattle to eat the corn.
Right. It's kind of interesting that you can grow up in Iowa and then come to live in Saratoga and then rediscover farming and community in I was going to say in your later life, but really it kind of found you, kind of like storytelling may have found you?
Yeah, I guess that it was gradual because I was working at Time Magazine during the early farm crisis of the 80s. And articles that were being written upset me a lot. And I went up to Ed Magnuson's office and went right in and wept at him over some of the things he was saying. So very gradually, farming came back to me.
Oh, really?
And when I began to get upset about the food system. And I joined the farm where Brian and Justine Denison Farm was the first CSA in our area, and Janet Britt was the farmer then. And I was a volunteer then she had 100 CSA members for a long time. Wow. And then, yes, and storytelling found me, I would say, in similar ways. I was a teacher of English as a second language, and I always went to the oral language parts of English literature conferences because that was mostly what I needed to deal with my students. And there was a man there once who was giving a workshop on how to choose a story. And he was writing a book, which I've never seen, and he didn't tell any stories, but he talked about the process of choosing a story, which just sounded wonderful to me. I was a good student and I did what I was assigned, but there was not any, as he described it, you read lots of stories, which was a treat because I love to read. I spent hours in the haymow with my kitties and my books as a child. But he described that you read a lot of stories and then you just put them aside and you see what one just kind of comes back to you. And that sort of mystical, non-deductive process had not entered my life in any conscious way before that. So I very indirectly went in search of storytelling. So I guess it came to me in a way.
Well, it's always interesting to hear people's story about how they discovered the storyteller inside, if you will, and it's just interesting because you've got a background in language.
Yes, but I discovered after I'd been telling stories for quite some time that I also had a background in storytelling, that my father and his mother used to recite Victorian readings when, people got around together in parlors, as they used to do. There was no music, it seems, in our family, so it wasn't music and story.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
I didn't know that.
Didn't know that. Well, we've got more we could just talk about, but I think we'd love to have you tell us a story, wouldn't we, Kate?
Yes.
I think it's time.
That one that you found amongst the many that spoke to you.
The bubble up story or whatever.
Okay. Well, I chose, the stories I brought today are folk tales. And the first one I think I'll tell comes from, well, they both come from Japan, actually. So the first one is The Stonecutter. Once there was a man who cut stone. He was very good at his job. The stone that he cut was not just used to build roads and bridges, but to make the most beautiful temples and palaces in Japan. He knew exactly how to place his chisel and strike it with his hammer so that the stone broke exactly straight and true. Still, there were times when he hated his work. He was out there, whether it was pouring rain, whether it was blazing hot, whether it was windy and cold, chipping away at that stone. And one day he threw down his tools and he said, "Why do I have to be chipping away at this mountain all the time? Why can't I have pleasure and amusement as other people do?" And when he stopped talking, he heard the sound of music and many feet, and when he looked, there was a great procession coming down the mountain road. In the beginning, the musicians making what he had heard. In the back, swaying dancers making a beautiful ending. Shining armor-polished soldiers on one side, on the other side, servants. And in the center, the reason for the whole procession, the emperor on a shining black horse with a gown of purple and gold at his neck and his wrists. To keep him from the sun, a red canopy. Saku the stonecutter watched until this procession was out of sight. And he said, "Oh, if only I could know what it felt like, just for 5 minutes, to be the emperor." And a voice spoke somewhere around him. It said, "Saku, be the emperor." And so Saku felt himself astride that horse. There was the music and the dancers and the soldiers and the servants, but some of the musicians hit wrong notes. Some of the soldiers hadn't polished their armor, and some of the servants were whispering, and some of the dancers were clumsy, and he was hot, even though that canopy was over his head, and he could see through the canopy the sun. "Oh," he said, "there's something stronger than the emperor. I wish I knew what it felt like, just for 5 minutes, to be the sun." And the voice said, "Saku, be the sun." So there he was, shining and fiery in the sky. But he didn't know how to be the sun. He shone and shone and shone until all the humans and the animals sought shelter, and the plants began to droop. And then the streams dried up, and great cracks opened in the earth, and even the rivers were dry. And the people begged for rain. And then a little cloud came and put itself between Saku the sun and the earth, and Saku the cloud, the sun, said, "There's something stronger than the sun. I'd like to be that cloud." And you know what the voice said. So Saku felt all his fires going out, and instead he was light and fluffy, and at first as white as my sweater. But then moisture began to cling to that cloud. It began to be gray and heavy, and then so full that it split open with lightning, and thunder rolled across Japan, and the rain began to pour down on the earth, and the people felt it on their faces. But again, Saku didn't know how to rain. He kept raining. First the cracks were filled, then the streams, then the rivers, and everything was overflowing. And then everything was washed away. Houses, people, even the great temples and palaces of Japan. But Saku, the cloud, saw only left the mountain where he had cut stone. And he said, "There's something stronger than the cloud. Make me into that mountain." And the voice said, "Be the mountain, Saku." So he sank heavy, heavy down into the earth, feet and miles under, and he surveyed the emptiness that was all of Japan, until he saw a little speck. That little speck was coming toward him. That little speck had arms and legs and a head and a body, and as it came closer, he saw it held tools, one in each hand. He felt little spidery feet coming up his mountain chest. He felt the edge of a chisel. And then he felt a trembling through all his stony mountain body when the hammer struck the chisel. And Saku the mountain said, Ah, me. There's something stronger than the mountain. If only I, that man might be. And the voice spoke for the last time and it said, Saku, be yourself. A human being once again. Saku brushed the stone dust from his face and his robes, picked up his hammer and his chisel, and this time when he struck the chisel, he knew how strong he really was. And he never wished to be anyone but himself again.
Oh, lovely, lovely,
Thank you.
lovely. That's, that's a old traditional tale. But when I hear you tell it again, you animate it in such a vibrant way that it's just wonderful.
And of course, when you got to the flood part, I went to Schoharie, and those were the pictures that I was seeing. I was momentarily no longer in Japan. I was in this flooded Schoharie Valley.
And of course, you see the drought. I see the drought in Iowa, my beloved place, and even on the farm this summer when we didn't have enough water.
Now, when you found that story the first time, share us, if you will, the process of how it came to be a story you told. In that idea of kind of having a story bubble through you.
Yeah, I think I may have read it first in Ruth Sawyer's collection, The Way of the Storyteller, which is, the Bible, the beginning original Bible. And she has not only how to pick and choose stories, and that you should have all kinds of tales in your repertoire, folk tales, myth, personal stories, history stories, literary stories, but she also has a collection of stories in the back. So it's called Hafiz, the Storyteller, in that collection. But Gerald McDermott has also done a picture book of that story. And there are some versions of the story, I think, that have two stonecutters, like those good bad girl stories, the good one goes out and does everything right and the bad one is greedy. And I don't remember how that one goes, but I always try to find several versions of the story, and then once I've found those versions and looked at them, I feel more allowed, I guess, to put together the story in my own way. And of course, over the years of telling, it changes as experience comes into it and the images change. So. And as you tell it in different circumstances, the images do change, don't they? I mean, probably the background. Storytelling for me is the story, the teller, and the listener. And so even though I'm telling a story that I've told, in this case, since I began 30 years ago, the listeners are always different. I'm different because I've had different experiences. So, Kate may see the Schoharie flood, I may see the Vermont flood, I may see the flooding in Iowa, I see the Denison Farm and the dryness. Right. And the audience also sees their own visions. Right. And as you said earlier, we travel when we listen to stories between the story and our own memories. Yeah. Right. Right.
And while it was very calm here in the studio, as we expect, another thing that alters the telling is something that happens as you are telling. I remember one time you were telling at Cafe Lena, and a siren went by, and you said, there was no siren in my story. Oh, no, actually there was. And you incorporated that in and went on.
And there was one time a police radio came in through the microphone.
Yeah.
I mean, you never know, and that's I like to teach that that's one of the big differences between storytelling and theater. They say that when the wall of the set falls down in theater, you just ignore it and go on. And I don't know if the wall fell down, you would do that, but in storytelling, you work it into the story because that's the spontaneous live part of the story.
And I think it was Elizabeth Ellis, who was my other storytelling teacher. Jeannine was my first storytelling teacher. Elizabeth is my second one. Said, if there's an ongoing noise, even if it isn't bothering you, your listeners could be concerned for you. Or your listeners could be concerned about that. And so you need to address it to let them know it's okay. Yes, there is that loud humming that is not ideal. Yes, the compressor came on for whatever, but we'll just go on with it, and it'll fade.
Yes,
Yeah.
you invite it into the story circle because the listeners are much more bothered by any disturbance than you are because you're in the story making it, and so yes, you need to do whatever you can to enlarge the circle and make it possible for them to continue on the journey. You're the leader.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you need to bring them back alive if it's a real serious story.
Bring them back alive. I like that thought.
Well, Elizabeth Ellis said, said, when you're telling a story, you're essentially a tour guide, and it's implicit that when you sign up for a tour, you're going to come back alive.
Right.
And so you can share with people the depth of your despair, but you cannot leave them there.
You cannot leave them there.
You have to.
Well,
and if that's where you are, it's not a story we're ready to tell. You are still in the therapy part of the development of that particular story.
And Jeannine, you did a really nice job of kind of linking the story to Japan. In some way, it could be almost anywhere, but by having the very neat picture of the parade and the emperor, and then you kind of left a blank canvas on the country for people to fill in, and that was done just great. It was you found yourself doing that from whatever you could think of Japan looked like, so that you did take people places, and I think that's the other element that stories can actually let people travel.
And many storytellers, like Tom Weekly, for example, you can imagine that he could set that story in the granite
Right, it could be in New
areas
Hampshire,
of Vermont,
Yep, right.
or even in Granville, and it could be right here. But
Yeah.
I like to honor the place where the story came from. And when I'm telling in schools, it's often because they're studying Japan.
Right.
So
She also took us traveling in time.
Oh,
Because
that's
I
true.
don't think the Emperor of Japan in these days is on a horse with the red canopy and the,
And the
musicians
armor.
and the dancers, at least not typically.
Well, and the other interesting little byline was that once you got to be emperor, you realized that things weren't the way they look from a distance. There's a lot of moral in that story. I mean, in terms of that, so that was very telling, very telling. We're going to come back to Jeannine, to you in a minute. We're going to just kind of take a little time out to talk about storytelling and what's going on. And we mentioned that we were doing our 6th season at Proctor's. And we've got a program coming up at Proctor's I never know the dates. Kate,
On
help me
October,
here.
I'm kind of the detail person of this broadcast team.
Yes, definitely mole. Definitely mole.
Spine Chilling is at 2:00 on Sunday, October 14th. And our tellers will be Claire Beadlestone, Betty Cassidy, Peggy Semino, who I always have to say, she is the sweetest person in real life, but she tells some really stories. Margaret French, Marnie Gillard, Mary Murphy, and Elliot Neves from the Ithaca area. So we like to say that word plays combines the intensity of a solo performance with the intimacy of a face-to-face conversation. That's actually that's true for any kind of storytelling. But that's our tagline there. And tell us about the Sikkim connection.
Well, actually, we've done a number of changes this season at Proctor's. For those of you who have been into before, you may remember that we had a theme again for playing with the words. And we had two tellers who would team up and do a performance. And we've got more of a smorgasbord of storytelling with the theme. And we're bringing more people together for the performance. And we think it's going to be even more fun. And there will still be good food to eat. And the other thing that's not like a dinner. That's just like, punch and cookies and things like that, cannoli and things like that. And then I work a lot with the Schenectady Inner City Ministry that runs a number of social outreach programs. One of the most important is the food pantry, which has seen an uptick in the number of people who need emergency food, and a program called Summer Lunch. And 70% of the students in Schenectady qualify for free lunches. And when school's out, there's no resource to serve those lunches. So Sikkim fills in, and as part of that, they've got to match some of that expense that the state covers. So they need $10,000 a year. So for every ticket we sell at Word Plays or at Telebration at Proctor's, $2 of that program cost is going to be donated to the summer lunch program. And the congregations, the 55 congregations in Sikkim, have been appreciative of storytelling over the years. So we think we'll look to them to bring groups, because they get, group tickets are $10 instead of $16. Eight, well, whatever. Like I said, she's the detail person. And same on the group tickets. So it's a way of having fellowship, it's a way of helping Sikkim, and it's a way of hearing some wonderful stories. So we hope that you'll join us with your friends at Word Plays sometime over the season.
And take pleasure in that you'll be helping to support feeding. Sikkim feeds 850 hungry children every day during the summer in our community.
In 12 different locations. So it's and if you want to next summer, check in via the website. Because if you want to serve lunch and meet some of these kids, it is a wonderful, refreshing experience. And I have stories about summer lunch, and I'll fill those in some other time.
What's the date for that telling again?
I'm so glad you asked. October 14th. And all of our programs at Proctor's, Word Plays and Telebration, are 2 o'clock on Sundays. Spine-chilling stories from the dark.
And it's just a quick walk from the Schenectady Green Market on J Street near City Hall down to Proctor's. So you could come and graze at the Green Market, buy some vegetables, pick up a sandwich or something, and then come on down the road to Word Plays.
With all your friends.
Yeah.
Okay, now the other thing we do at Proctor's, let me say, yes, this is the only other thing, the third kind of thing that we do at Proctor's, is we have a pre-show spoken word program at Robb Alley. That's the area across from the Apostrophe Cafe. And 4 times this season, we're doing a program an hour before production at the main theater that's themed to what's happening at the main theater. Last month in September, Marnie Gillard told Irish stories before Celtic Thunder. And in October, on Friday, October 19th at 7 p.m., Claire Nolan will be telling magical stories before Spencer's Theater of Illusion. So this is free. This is our way of saying, hey, you people who are coming to Proctor's, we're here too. Story Circle is here, and come enjoy the stories, and then come to our other productions too.
So if you're on your way to the production, that's an opportunity. And if you just want to come and have coffee and hear a story, you can pay for the coffee and get the stories for free.
Yes, and we will be giving away pairs of free tickets. 2 or 3 pairs of free tickets for the people who are listening to these pre-show spoken word programs as another incentive of, hey, look me over,
Hey, show
lend
up.
me an ear. There's a song there. Okay. But as we mentioned earlier, the 100th Story Sunday is coming up on Sunday, October 21st at 5 p.m. with Jeannine Laverty and Becky Holder, Homecoming with Ghosts.
Becky will be telling some of her wonderful Ida Chittum stories that have just some of the best ghosts you'll ever hear.
Oh, and that was, you had a cassette of Ida Chittum stories.
Yeah,
Last century.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether which one
Yeah.
of what's on there she will tell. But
Right. And as is customary with all of our Story Sundays, you get 4 courses of stories interwoven with 3 courses of food, and you get a choice of your entree between 3 different ones. Usually it's a beef, a chicken, and a vegetarian, but Glenn Sanders threw in a couple of fish here and there, and
Throw me a fish. Yeah,
and so it's you get a variety of choices each month, and we're going to be celebrating it. There will be door prizes. There will be a special dessert. Don't tell them, Joe.
I'm not going to tell them it's a special dessert.
Well, no, don't tell them what the special is. Okay.
I won't tell them what it is?
No.
Oh, okay.
But Glenn Sanders, as always, is treating us very nicely. And
Did you tell me what the special dessert was?
we talked about it on email.
you better not tell him because
Remember, we negotiated.
It's better that I don't know. It's better that I don't know
Because
because
then
I
you
might
can't
tell you
tell.
what it
Right,
was.
right, okay.
Because I kind of want to clue you in.
Yeah, but it's going to be really special.
Yeah.
So, okay, and then speaking of special, so this is our October program, but Telebration this year is on November 4th. So you might not get a chance to see our November program before Telebration has already happened. So we felt we needed to mention that this year it's wild, weird, and wonderful.
We named it after ourselves, kind of, yes.
Pretty much, actually, but no. A committee. We were around a table and a bunch of people, and the W's just overwhelmed us. And
There were a bunch of wild, weird, wonderful people around the table, and that's the name they came up with.
Right.
And again, this is at 2 o'clock on the 4th, and the Green Market will be inside Proctor's, so you don't even have to walk down the street. You can graze the Green Market, have your lunch, come on into Telebration, and we'll have dessert waiting for you, but it probably won't be a special dessert. It'll just be something simple.
well,
they're always
Ooh.
yummy desserts.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they're-
almost always all homemade. That
What do I
Story
know?
Circle
I don't know.
combines. I mean, special in a different way.
Special in a different way.
Though each just that's kind of true of every dessert.
Every dessert might, absolutely.
especially if it's chocolate. But I digress. Okay, so we hope you join us for Telebration. Again, we'll have a collection of tellers. Our final audition for Telebration is tonight because we're taping it in September. But on our website, storycircle@proctors.org, there will be the tellers who've been selected, and if they have videos of stories, we'll have the videos available so you can get a sampling of the different storytellers and their different styles. Okay. Whoops.
We have a whoops. Just a
Yeah, we
second.
have whoops. That I recycle the slides from each show, and I haven't updated this one. We now have over 7 hours of stories worth watching on YouTube from our storytellers. So go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on YouTube. On those times when you want to watch something, and amazingly, there's nothing on TV that's of interest.
Well, and again, it's that library of our TV clips of tellers. I think it's a great thing to have if you're looking to have a program and thinking about hiring a storyteller. You can go not only get a private audition with a topic that's kind of related to maybe what you're looking for. So it's a wonderful resource. And if you want to introduce somebody from your world to storytelling, you don't have to wait for one of our performances. You can just say, go check out on the web and pick X. Mm-hmm. And there's some wonderful range of stories there.
Unfortunately, there are many people who when you say, "Oh, I'm a storyteller," they respond with, "Oh, you read books to children at libraries." And that is one flavor of storytelling, but most of the storytelling that happens in this area by storytellers and Story Circle involve no book in between us, just us looking into your eyes and sharing a story. And finally, if you'd like to help, as with all arts organizations, the ticket sales do not pay for all of our expenses. You can become a patron at Story Circle of Proctors, and we have some benefits. And you'd like to check this out, storycircleofproctors.org, how you can help with dashes in between there, as you see on your screen.
And the last bit of commercial is if you're interested in learning more about storytelling and don't want to do it online, we as a guild of storytellers meet once a month. We actually meet probably twice a month. We meet once a month in the Capital District here at the Colonie Library on the third Tuesday of the month. If it's an odd month, and then because of some folks who can't make Tuesday nights, on the even months like October, this month, it will be at
Pine Hills
Library in Albany. And you can just come and listen, or if you want to tell a story or just connect, it's goodly company, as I would call it. The other thing that is on our calendar is an open mic up in Saratoga, and Jeannine is one of the folks that facilitates that at Cafe Lena. And that's usually on
the second Monday of every other month.
Every other month.
The odd months.
Odd
the
months.
Second Monday of the odd months, and the even months we're at Woodlawn Commons. And at Lena's we have a featured teller and a small admission charge of $3. At Woodlawn Common it's free, and they provide the refreshments.
On the second Wednesday of the month.
Thank you.
Second month.
Even numbered.
month.
It sounds like this is sort of an intelligence test that you have to pass in order to find us. But it's, again, to accommodate people's different schedules. And it's all available on the website, either,
Right.
if you go to storycircleofproctors.org, there's a whole bunch of navigation buttons. Open mic is one of them, even though it's not at Proctor's. We figure once people get there, they might be interested in things,
Right.
other things that we do, not necessarily at Proctor's.
And one of our main goals as storytellers here with Story Circle is to interest and encourage new folks to be storytellers. And we do that through a lot of this stuff, but we really do it through these monthly meetings and our open mic nights. So please try us out. Be fun. Speaking of being fun and hearing stories, we can now travel just like we were at the open mic at Cafe Lena. And we can ask Jeannine to tell us another story as if we were in that folksy place, right? We can just go there. And so we're just going to join Jeannine Laverty for a story in her role as the facilitator of the open mic at Cafe Lena.
Or in my role as the teller coming up in October at Glenn Sanders.
That's true. That's even better.
Yes.
Homecoming.
October 21st.
Homecoming.
Homecoming with Ghosts
Homecoming
is our
with Ghosts.
title. Well, this is another Japanese story. In Kami, there lived a man named Kiku Saburo. He lived in a fine manor house that was surrounded by vegetable fields, rice fields, and beautiful mountains with forested trees. All this had come to him from his family. Now, Kiku Saburo was not a bad man. It was just that he hated to work, and he loved pleasure. And he had not even gotten into his 30s before he had huge debts to pay off. And so, little by little, he started selling off some of the fields, some of the rice fields, and then, as the debts continued to mount, the forests, the mountains. As time passed, all the land and the forested mountains that he could see from the house were gone. There was just the land around the manor house, which was still filled with its plush carpets, fine ceramic glazed vases and painted scrolls, ebony furnishings with brocaded fabrics. There was only left behind the house one mountain. This one was thick with trees. Kiku Saburo looked out at it one night as it fell into the shadow and said, "Tomorrow I will not sleep late. I will rise early. I will climb that mountain as I have not done since I was a child. But I will not play. I will take a tablet. I will count each tree. I will note what type each tree is, so that when I sell the last mountain, I will know exactly what timber there is, what is available, and I will get the best price." And he did rise early that morning, that following morning. Up he went. He remembered the trail where he had not been, but he paid attention to the details. He was Kate, not Joe in this case. He wrote down every kind of tree, kept a tally of how many there were, and before the sun had reached its midday height, he was on his way back down. He followed a stream that started near the top of the mountain. "Oh yes," he said, "I remember this stream. It leads to a lake." And as he went around a bend, there was that lake. And around the lake, the trees were so thick that even the midday sun did not penetrate, so it was dark and cool. Kiku Saburo was sweating from climbing the mountain and all that work. He sat down, leaned against a boulder and said, "I remember as a child there were so many frogs, little ones, deep ones." And as he sat there still, the frogs began to sing again. Kiku Saburo rested his head against the boulder. He listened to the frogs. He felt the exertion of the morning drain away, until he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was cold and wet. And when he turned to look, he saw a man, a creature. He was not too tall, bent. He had a mouth as wide as that of a frog and eyes that protruded like the eyes of a frog. And when he spoke, Kiku Saburo was not sure whether he was a man or a frog. "Kiku Saburo, sir, you will pardon me for interrupting your nap. We have all watched you this morning climbing and counting. We beg you not to sell the mountains to someone who will cut the trees. For if you do, the sun will shine and dry and pack the soil of the mountain. The lake will be smaller. And then when the rains come, they will slide down that hillside with no roots or growing things to hold them. And the silt will wash into the stream and then into the lake, and we will not be able to breathe. I beg you, Kiku Saburo." And as he bent his head, Kiku Saburo looked down and saw that his robes, which had appeared to be of multicolored green silk, were dripping with lake water. They were made of the many different colors of weeds that grew in the lake. I cannot do this," Kiku Saburo said. The frog chief lifted his head. He put his webbed fingers on Kiku Saburo's hand. So icy cold were those fingers that Kiku Saburo startled. There was no one there. Not even any wetness from the dripping from the frogman's robe. Kiku Saburo stood and walked down, and when he went inside his manor house, he looked at everything that was there and said goodbye to it. Because the next day, he went to the largest village and sent word that all antique dealers should come. They did. Oh, they came. And they argued with each other over prices. They took away everything, and Kiku Saburo had enough to pay his debts. All that was left in the house was his bed and a white paper screen worth nothing. Kiku Saburo lay down and went to sleep. He was at peace. When he woke the next morning, before he had opened his eyes, he heard small, medium, and large frog sounds. Oh, he said, I must still be dreaming. It is as if I am out at the lake. They are so close. But when he opened his eyes, it was not the woods, but the ceiling of his own house. He swung his feet around, and when they touched the floor, it was wet. He saw small, medium, and large frog prints, and his eyes followed those prints to the screen, which was painted with frogs, swimming, sitting, leaping, sleeping. He smiled and stood in front of the screen, and he could smell not only the musky, watery, lakey smell from the frogs, but the wet paint. Kiku Saburo walked outside. He started picking up the rubbish that was in the yard. He saw some boards that had fallen off the outside of the house, and he rummaged in a shed and found a hammer and some nails and fastened them on, and then went back and looked at the screen again. He found a cloth and started polishing the doorknobs in his house. From that day on, he looked at the screen, he laughed. He pulled the weeds from that rubbishy yard and planted some vegetables. Then, in the wet parts of the yard, he planted rice. And little by little, he enlarged and was able to buy back first a small field, and then eventually all the fields. His house stayed empty until he married and had children, and then their beds and their tables and their chairs, they began to fill it up, but in a simple way this time. And eventually he bought back all the surrounding mountains. Only the one behind him was still filled with trees. When Kiku Saburo grew old, his family cared for him and cared for the land. One morning, they found that he had gone to the other world. That evening, they noticed that the screen was fading. And in the days to come, it became again a plain white screen. But the lake of the cloaking frogs is still there today. If you travel to Japan, you could sit, as Kiku Saburo did, and listen to the frogs. The screen was lost, but the lake and the mountains and the trees and the fields and the food are there. You know,
Thank you.
as that story came to an end, I saw the tsunami And when I watched that, I saw it covering the fields
Yeah. Oh,
when I watched it on television.
television. Yeah. Oof.
After the one that became the nuclear disaster.
Right. Boy, oh boy.
I have to say that one of the places your story took me was Colorado. Because when we were out there when our son was young in the Rocky Mountains, we took a day tour of old gold mining locations. And I couldn't believe it. There were tree stumps just covering this mountainside. And the guide explained that the trees were all cut to shore up the shaft, the mining shaft that went into the mountain. And they were so thorough that the trees, there was no way the trees could come back. It was clear cut and over 100 years ago. So when the one mountain with the trees, I'm going, no, not the trees. No, they won't come back. And yes, in your story you had, they were bare because you cut them all down at once. They don't. How do they come back?
And there's not enough rain in Colorado that what would happen in the story had happened there. You could still see, but
Yeah.
Well, and the place that I travel is tomorrow I'm doing a program up at Pasico Lake with UCall, the adult learning program at Union College. And when you drive into the Adirondacks, you see all these trees, and you have to then understand that that's second growth, that they've been harvested at least once, and that you're in an area that whatever the vestiges of the area are all stem from that lumbering industry. And we're at the Irondequoit Inn, which is a little bastion of preservation, but was really started by the 1% as a place to have salvage from the city, and they didn't cut the trees as close to the lake as they did other places. So I was kind of getting ready for that, because there's a whole storyline there about what it means to care for creation,
I guess Kiku Saburo's family had been part of the 1%,
Right.
and he became the bottom of the 99%,
yeah.
and then
Yes.
had help to find his way back.
Yes, the frog spoke to him.
Sure.
Yes.
The
Homecoming with Ghosts.
Homecoming with
With
Ghosts.
ghosts.
That's kind of a froggy ghost, I'll tell you. Just
And we don't always have to go away to
Right.
come back home.
Right,
We just
that's
have
true.
to see it.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, unfortunately, our time has flown.
Is that right? Already?
Yes. I have it here on my little clock.
It's a detail. I wouldn't worry about it. Right.
So it's time to say goodbye to you for now. We hope you'll join us next month for our next episode of Story by Story, Sharing the Human Experience. I'm Kate Dudding.
And I'm Joe Doolittle, and remember, without you, without listeners, there's no story.
And thanks to our guest, Jeannine Laverty.
Thank you, Joe and Kate, for having me.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round